What's up guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here then welcome to our little corner of the internet. Today we're going to be watching a video titled "The US Enforced the Iran Blockade. What now?" This is from Simon. We've been watching some of his videos, so let's see what this is about.
Following the Iran war, then you probably know that this past week has been one of the most frustrating to make sense of. 1 minute the Strait of Hormuz is open, the oil markets are selling.
I haven't really been following these past maybe week and a half of about anything that's going on, so this ought to be interesting.
Celebrating what seems like a reprieve from the high prices, and the next strait is closed again and oil prices are surging. And it's not just the Strait of Hormuz giving Iran observers a headache. Over the weekend, it was announced that Washington and Tehran would head back to Islamabad for negotiations. However, everything from the composition of the negotiating teams to whether the negotiations would even happen was up in the air for much of Sunday as competing narratives, some from different corners of the White House, competed for airspace. Tehran also has had its fair share of infighting as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, appeared to publicly chastise one of Iran's lead negotiators, Abbas Araghchi, the nation's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Still, as of Monday, there was one clear headline event that had taken place: the seizure by the US of an Iranian cargo vessel that had tried to run Washington's blockade. While the geopolitical fallout from this is still uncertain at the time of recording, what is certain is that this war is still not yet over, with all the chaos that statement implies. Hormuz news. As has been the case for multiple weeks now, all the big news out of Iran recently has been focused on the Strait of Hormuz. On Friday at about 4:15 p.m. Iranian time, Foreign Affairs Minister Araghchi wrote on X that the Strait of Hormuz was completely open for the remainder of the ceasefire and ships could travel through the routes announced by the Iranian Maritime Authority. On his own social channels, President Trump confirmed the strait was open, although he emphasized that the US naval blockade of Iran would remain in full force, all caps, until Iran reached a deal with the US to end the war. In a separate post, he said that Iran had agreed to never close the Strait of Hormuz again and that it would never be used as a...
How long was it closed for? Because, I saw that the gas prices went up, no, but not significantly to my knowledge. I might be so wrong though. Where can we expect, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, where can we expect to see it?
Weapon against the world. According to the New York Times, the announcements propelled US stock markets to record highs and sent oil prices tumbling by more than 10%, as most observers believed that it signaled the possibility of a broader peace deal. And that, dear viewer, is what playwrights like to call dramatic irony. Still, for people back in the bygone era of Friday, there was good reason to be optimistic about a peace deal. After all, Israel and Lebanon had just agreed to their own 10-day ceasefire following rare, direct talks between Lebanese and Israeli officials. Under the terms of that deal, as outlined by the US State Department, only Lebanon's official security forces would be authorized to bear arms in the south, the Lebanese government would be expected to take meaningful steps to prevent Hezbollah and other non-state armed groups from carrying out attacks against Israeli targets, and Israel would not carry out any offensive military operations against Lebanon while retaining its right to act in self-defense against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks. Additionally, the ceasefire could also be extended beyond the initial 10 days if both countries agreed and if Lebanon made progress in asserting its sovereignty against Hezbollah. While Hezbollah was not a party to the negotiations, it acknowledged the announcement, affirming a cautious commitment to the ceasefire, even if it then did release a statement chastising the Lebanese government and reaffirming its commitment to armed struggle. So far, though, the deal does seem to be holding. The UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon reported that as the ceasefire approached the 24-hour point, Israeli airstrikes had stopped in southern Lebanon and that no projectiles had been fired into Israel from Lebanese territory. But the peacekeepers observed airspace violations by the Israeli military in their area of operations, along with reports of mortar and artillery shelling in some areas of southern Lebanon. For Iran, the deal was a significant diplomatic and strategic win, as it had conditioned its own ceasefire negotiations with Washington on a concurrent halt in Lebanon and had secured that without having to re-enter the war. And for President Trump, it was proof that his personal brand of diplomacy worked. This and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz meant that he could direct his full attention towards securing a peace deal along his preferred terms. However, the Strait of Hormuz wouldn't remain open for long. Within hours of Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister Araghchi announced...
I'm confused also about the fact that, now if it feels like a lot of people are waiting for the war to end, but like what will be the conclusion of it? Because
the strait's opening, the IRGC Navy
I don't know. I don't know.
We broadcast a starkly different message on International Maritime Channel 16, the emergency frequency monitored by all vessels at sea. By that, we mean they publicly called Aragachi an idiot, declared that the strait was still closed, and that it would only be reopened by the order of Iran's new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. And we need to take a moment to appreciate just how insane that statement is, because how often do you see a nation's navy publicly insulting one of the nation's highest-ranked officials in the middle of a war? But the madness doesn't stop there. The IRGC-linked Tasnim news agency followed up with a written statement describing Aragachi's post as, quoting them here, a bad and incomplete tweet. A second IRGC-linked outlet, Fars News, added to the pylon saying Iranian society had been plunged into an atmosphere of confusion by the foreign minister's announcement. Again, this isn't what you would expect outlets linked to a regime to be saying about the regime's top negotiator. The Institute for the Study of War noted that the IRGC's criticism of Aragachi was reflective of broader divisions within the Iranian regime. Divisions that have only gotten sharper since the US and Israel killed many of the high-ranking figures who used to hold the various factions together. But while it may be darkly comic to watch the Iranian regime fling manure at one of its own, it doesn't augur well for anyone hoping that diplomacy produces a lasting peace. If Aragachi cannot make concessions without being publicly humiliated by IRGC-linked media, then he isn't a negotiator, but merely a messenger passing along Washington's wishes to the hardliners back in Tehran. That said, it's worth acknowledging that we may be reading too much into this. Iran has always been a state with multiple factions and power centers, and the IRGC has long operated as the most powerful of these, given their access to wealth and arms. Public friction between the military establishment and the diplomatic corps is not entirely new, even if this week's version was unusually loud. There are also some who believe that
I feel like I need to catch up again. Also, I'm pretty quiet because I mean he's explaining so much in such a short time each time that it's like you really need to listen to catch what he's saying, no?
Seeing is deliberate. A good cop, bad cop dynamic, designed to give Aragachi negotiating room while signaling to the domestic hardliner base that the IRGC remains in control. At the moment, it's impossible to know what school of thought is right, and Iran is, understandably, very protective of its signal chat invites. But while we may not be able to say for certain what was going on behind the scenes, we can report on what effect all of this has had on the Strait of Hormuz, and that would be chaos. And before we get into that chaos, a quick reminder of our latest project, Fronts.co, for all of you who want even more from us, especially in-depth stuff on these Iran-based stories. Fronts.co is our subscriber-only site where we dig deeper into the stories shaping your world. Every week, we publish 2 videos and at least 2 expert-written articles, plus occasional podcasts covering events in the Middle East and the rest. Now, back to chaos in the Strait of Hormuz. Chaos. So after all that, Tehran announced on Saturday that control of the Strait of Hormuz had, quote, returned to its previous state, with the IRGC adding that the US blockade on Iranian ports represented acts of piracy and maritime theft, and that the waterway would remain tightly controlled until Washington restored full freedom of navigation for Iranian vessels. For some ships that were looking to transit the strait, this meant turning back to avoid angering Iran. Others, including 6 cruise ships that had been caught in the Persian Gulf since the war began, kept moving. By Sunday, all 6 had either cleared the strait or were making their final run through it, with the Aroya Manara, the last to depart, pulling out of Dammam after nearly 50 days trapped. Other ships were also lucky.
But this is that's not like a oil ship, that is like a cruise ship. I don't know if I would go on a cruise ship.
Nara, the last to depart, pulling out of Dammam after nearly 50 days trapped. Other ships were not so lucky. 2 Indian-flagged vessels, including an oil tanker, came under fire from Iranian gunboats. India's foreign secretary summoned the Iranian envoy to the foreign ministry in New Delhi on Saturday evening to formally lodge its protest. India had been among the countries Iran designated as friendly and had previously allowed several Indian-flagged ships through on designated routes. For Tehran, firing on Indian ships was a risky choice, as it cannot afford to make any more enemies while locked in an existential war against two of the most militarily powerful nations on the planet. Iran's envoy to India, Abdul-Majid Hakem Elahi, seemed to recognize as much, telling the press that the relationship between India and Iran was very strong. But all this paled beside the weekend's biggest, most dramatic event, the moment an Iranian vessel tried to run the US blockade. Here are the facts as of standing on Monday morning. On Sunday, the situation in the water escalated sharply when the guided missile destroyer USS Spruance intercepted an Iranian-flagged cargo vessel after the latter failed to comply with multiple radio warnings issued over a 6-hour period to halt or else. United States Central Command, or CENTCOM, said the Spruance ordered the vessel's engine room to be evacuated and then fired several rounds into it. Or as President Trump later put it, the destroyer, quote, stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engine room. Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit then boarded and seized the vessel. This was the first ship that actually attempted to run the blockade since it was put in place on the 13th of April. In that time, US forces had ordered 25 other vessels to turn around without incident, each complying when hailed by the Navy. This incident was seemingly engineered to test whether Washington would respond with force and how much force if Iran tried to run the blockade. At time of recording, the ultimate fallout of this incident isn't yet clear. Tehran called the seizure a ceasefire violation and warned it would retaliate, with the regime announcing this morning that it would not attend any more talks. Not that the negotiations were going particularly well anyway. On Sunday, speaking to ABC News chief Washington correspondent,
I mean, at the start, they didn't even want to negotiate, so at least it's going somewhere, but...
Jonathan Karl, Trump acknowledged that Iran had committed a serious violation of the ceasefire, but he still believed that he could get a peace deal. He was equally as optimistic in a separate call with Axios, telling the outlet that the concept of a deal was done. Less clear was the composition of the US negotiating team, specifically whether J.D. Vance would be attending. Several officials, including Mike Waltz, America's ambassador to the UN, and Energy Secretary Chris Wright, told the press that Vance would be leading the negotiations. But then Trump called Jonathan Karl, who had just spoken with Waltz, to clarify that Vance would not be going to Islamabad because of security concerns, as the Secret Service couldn't secure the venue within 24 hours. Roughly 90 minutes later, the White House reversed again, confirming that Vance would in fact be traveling to Pakistan alongside Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. All of this back and forth over whether Vance would be in attendance is important because Iran distrusts Witkoff and Kushner. According to several observers, including Branko Macetic, an analyst for responsible statecraft, the war might have started, at least in part, because of the pair's mischaracterization of Iran's position. Tehran had previously made it clear that it would only engage in negotiations with Vance because, while he has publicly supported the war, he has privately been skeptical of it, and in Tehran's eyes, this makes him a more acceptable diplomatic figure. Still, none of that ultimately matters if, as reports this morning suggest, Tehran won't participate anyway following the seizure of the tanker. Although we should point out that this may itself just be another negotiating tactic. According to Al Jazeera's Kamal Haider, who is reporting from Islamabad, Tehran will most likely be participating in the negotiations. He cited the preparations currently underway in Islamabad, including the unprecedented security. More than 20,000 security personnel have been deployed and large areas of the city sealed off. That's a lot of work for host nation Pakistan, and Iran may not want to disappoint them. With the ceasefire set to expire on Wednesday, though, time is running out for games, all of which means we'll know soon enough whether this has all been part of the diplomatic dance or whether the seizure of this one vessel really will mean a return to war. Zooming out. Away from the chaos surrounding Iran and the US for a moment, we should talk about several other major developments in this conflict, including a potential rift between Washington and Jerusalem. After the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon was announced late last week, President Trump posted...
What is Iran's purpose though? Because if they're not going to negotiate anymore, what do they want?
Truth Social that Israel was prohibited from conducting strikes in Lebanon. It was a remarkable statement for an American president to make towards a longtime ally, let alone one currently fighting alongside Washington in the Middle East. According to Axios, Netanyahu and his advisors were stunned when they learned of it from the media. Aides, including Israeli Ambassador Washington Yichel later, scrambled to understand whether Washington had changed course, and the Israeli government formally asked the White House for clarification, arguing that the post contradicted the text of the ceasefire agreement, which allowed Israel to act in self-defense against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks. The White House later walked the president's statement back, saying that the ceasefire guaranteed Israel the right to defend itself. This episode underscored something that observers have been noting since the beginning of the war. The gap between what Trump posts and what American policy actually is has become one of the more disorientating features of the current era for allies and adversaries alike. 2026 alone is rife with instances of leaders and diplomats assuming they'd secured some concession or agreement from Trump, only for the president to then blow it all up by, I don't know, threatening to invade and annex Greenland or something. And while most of this has been directed at enemies like Iran or NATO allies, this latest incident shows that not even Israel is safe from being blindsided by an errant social media post. Elsewhere in the Middle East, the Houthis, an Iranian proxy group in Yemen, have decided to more forcefully insert themselves into the war. On Saturday, Houthi official Hussein al-Azizi posted on X warning that the Bab al-Mandab Strait, a vital shipping corridor located...
I don't understand also this Twitter thing. I mean, it's X now, but like... Is it now like a news type of thing? Because why are these things coming out on Twitter? I don't know. X seems pretty wild.
Between Yemen and the Horn of Africa could be closed. The Bab al-Mandeb is the gateway through which most of Europe's Gulf energy imports travel on their way to the Suez Canal. With the Strait of Hormuz already in a state of on and off closure, Elizabeth Kendall, president of Girton College at Cambridge University, told Al Jazeera that a simultaneous disruption of both straits was a nightmare scenario that would disrupt, if not cripple, trade toward Europe. Blocking both straits is Iran's final trump card, pun absolutely intended, and any threats without significant moves by the Houthis to follow them up are best understood as Iran subtly reminding the world that it still has levers that it can pull if it wants to make this war even more painful for everyone. And finally, we turn our attention to the United Arab Emirates, where, according to the Wall Street Journal, the governor of the country's central bank has raised the idea of a currency swap line with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. A currency swap line is an agreement between two central banks to exchange their respective currencies on demand. It gives the requesting country access to dollars when its own reserves come under pressure, and it prevents a foreign currency shortage from cascading into a widespread domestic financial crisis. According to the journal, while the UAE hasn't requested a formal swap line, the fact that the talks happened highlights Abu Dhabi's concerns that the war could inflict major damage on its economy and its position as a global financial hub, depleting its foreign reserves and scaring away investors who once saw it as a stable and secure place for their money. And Abu Dhabi isn't the only country that is dealing with the ripple effects of this war. All around the world, nations are coping with soaring fuel prices, which had caused the price of basic commodities, including food, to surge. And yet it still remains unclear when this war may end. As is the nature of these things these days, it could be that the seizure of this tanker has derailed everything, or it may turn out that come Wednesday, the Iranians and JD Vance are sitting together in Islamabad, smiling stiffly for the cameras, ready to negotiate a lasting peace. All that we can do is assure you that whatever the outcome, we'll be here to keep you updated as best we can.
Yeah. It's this whole war has been kind of like you never know what's going to happen next type of thing. But it's going on way longer than expected, obviously. So, I mean, there's just no way to know what's going to happen. But yeah. Thank you guys for joining me for this video. I really hope you found it informative. Please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!